Obviously, are you up to speed fully with what has happened here in our community?
I think so. Where a unknown person came in asking for a meeting.
Mhm.
Two children were shot, and um, then the man, or I'm taking it was a man, took his own life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so this is one of those situations where there are still, it hasn't even been 24 hours yet, so there are still a lot of unanswered questions. We don't know, we know that two kindergarten boys were shot. We don't know if there was somebody who intervened, like why, not to say only two children shot, two is too many, obviously. But we don't know kind of what stopped him from doing even more harm. But I do know that there was no school resource officer on campus. It's a very, very small school.
Is
Um,
it a private institution, private school?
it's a private Seventh Day Adventist school of only 34 children. So,
Okay.
you know, it's pretty, would you say that it's pretty uncommon for private small schools to have school resource officers?
Yes, it is, and especially that small. But after the Covenant School in Tennessee, in Nashville, after that shooting, we've seen an increase in private schools working with local law enforcement, working with local security companies to have security on their campus.
Yeah, to my understanding, like when some of the larger school districts in this area um decided to bring on school resources over the past 5, 10 years or so, it usually came through the form of some sort of state grant funding. And oftentimes it meant allowing the local police department to hire an extra person to be designated as a school resource officer. Are there other avenues besides that in terms of schools finding ways to have more of a security presence?
Well, first of all, there's a COPS grant, the Center for Policing, Community Policing, and they do grants, 3-year grants, which is absorbed by the city or local government after those 3 years. It requires also for those officers to be trained to work in the school environment, which we feel like is very, very important to work in that environment and to be properly selected. Just can't pick anybody off the street or to bring them inside that school environment to work. It needs to be a person that's properly selected and specifically trained to work in that environment because it's a very, very unique role in law enforcement or security to work in the educational environment because, you know, we they have to understand that the role of the school is for these students to feel safe and to learn and not to the presence of the police officers is not there to arrest and take students off. It's to keep students safe. But one thing it did come to my mind when I heard about your incident is that we can't protect every person everywhere. And even with an officer inside of that school, with the reason that person came into the school, and this could have happened if you had had 10 officers in that school, but having that person that if the person was willing to continue this act of violence, this awful act, then what is to mitigate it? Who is to stop it unless you have a trained person with the equipment on them to stop that incident from continuing? And as bad as some people don't like to think about it, we need people to stand in front of innocents and protect them from bad things.
Do you have any information or insight on whether or not in recent years, teachers or school administrators have been actively seeking concealed carry permits? If that's something that's been allowed in different states?
In different states, it has been allowed, and we've been in discussion with several different groups about that. What comes into play is being a retired law enforcement officer, retired um, firearms instructor, and training officer within the department I worked in. Um, what we worry about sometimes is the continued training. To carry a firearm is a huge responsibility, especially in an environment where it's you have you're responsible for everything that comes out the end of that gun. And if, and shooting a firearm is not something that is like the movies. It's not as simple as the movies. And misses are horrible to think about, and they happen. And so that continued training, that specific training to carry a gun in that type of environment, in that specific role, it needs to be ongoing and consistent. And also, how do we carry these guns? How do a teacher, how does an administrator keep those guns safe on their person, in their office, whatever it may be, so they're not, cannot be taken off of their body. We see police officers all the time with the guns on their hips, but those are level 3 holsters. And it is very difficult to pull that weapon from that holster. And officers are constantly trained on keeping that from happening also.
Right, okay. So what for schools like this one, for example, that a very small school and potentially limited funding and resources, is there some way to keep weapons off campus in terms of detection, or what are other schools implementing that might have known that this helped the school to know that this person had a gun before it was used?
Weapon detection systems are readily available. I think that prices on those are coming down. And especially in a small environment like this, where you have public entry areas, that you have one spot where you could have a device like this. You could also have a vestibule where people from the outside come into an area, announce themselves, check in, but they can also be checked in that area, which is cut off from the rest of the school, from the innocent children and staff inside that school. There's a lot of considerations to be made where these schools that have limited resources need to reach out to school safety professionals, have discussions with them on what is feasible to keep their school environment safe. Not everybody can afford a bulletproof glass, but now they're making laminates to go over glass that just lay over like on your car window, which are bullet resistant. So there are affordable ways, and they just need to reach out and talk to school safety professionals to continue to make their school inviting, continue to have it, where students can come in and feel safe and secure and have that social interaction, which they should have, which we all should enjoy, but also feel safe at the same time.
And does your association have any data on how students take these sort of safety upgrades when all of a sudden there might be a school resource officer or there's weapon detections? In general, do we know if it does help students' feeling of well-being, or make them feel like, shoot, gosh, I live in this dangerous environment where this is needed?
Well, first of all, that's a great question. And I think that, with this being prominent, I think it's coming to be more and more now, where we're starting to see a lot more weapon detections and a lot more visible security devices being set in schools. So I think that is something that they can find some data on in the future. But right now, I have not heard of anything like that. But we do know, before I became a police officer, I was an educator. And before, we do know that students learn better when they feel safe in their surroundings, when they're not only from the outside presence of dangers or from those, but from bullying and so forth. And these students are able to concentrate and learn better in these environments. A lot of these students come from areas that the safest place they go to every day is their school. Schools are still a very, very safe place, because a lot of times their environments, their homes, are not nearly as safe as a school environment.
Okay. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you think that families or maybe school administrators should keep in mind moving forward?
Well, I think that we should never think that it can't happen to us. In any environment we go to, we need to be thoughtful of our surroundings, and have a school safety team. Reach out to local municipalities, your sheriff's department or law enforcement officer. Sit down with everybody and think through things we don't want to think about. The things that we don't want to, it makes our mind, turn when we think about students being shot or staff members being shot. But we have to think about those before they happen. And are we doing everything within our means to keep our environment safe?
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.